Okay, so we're live for the Node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for August 27th, 2020. We'll be following the agenda as posted in the issue in the TSC repository, except that we may handle things a little bit out of order since we have a guest for one of the issues. Before we get started on the tagged issues, does anybody have any announcements that they'd like to make? Nobody else has the announcements. I'll mention one that, as we probably let you know in one of the earlier ones, the second director representative vote was open for the last week. We had a number of good candidates, and I was reelected as not reelected, but actually elected as the second director representative, which last year was the Node representative. But I'll still be acting in that role. So the good news on that front is I'll be able to easily give a update or answer any questions on the board front that we have in these TSC meetings, and I'll also be looking to be able to figure out the best way to do that for some of the other projects as well. I don't have any other specific CPC or board meeting updates unless people have some particular questions. As always, there's a great newsletter if you want to know the nitty-gritty of what's going on there that you can subscribe to. Otherwise, I don't think there's anything that I need to mention this week. So let's move on to the tagged issues. The first one that we have agreed to get started on is the issue number 904 in the TSC repo, which is the package manager discussion. And I think, James, you were the one who put that on the agenda, and we have Mail who's going to help take us through that as well. So I'm not sure how you want to kick that one off, James.
I will actually, if you're ready, what I'd like to, if you could just get an overview of what you've been working on, how it's relevant, and then once we get through that, then we can go through questions.
Sure. So for a bit of context, I've been working on Yarn since 2017, so a bit more than 3 years now. And one of the problems that we've had for all this time were people that were mentioning to us, I'm using this package manager because it's by default on Node, so it's difficult to use anything else, really. And that was something that we couldn't really influence. So that was a bit frustrating for us, as you can imagine. And over time, it actually became a problem because something that we don't often realize is that package managers are not really up to users to choose. They are up to projects. So, for example, I contribute to a lot of projects on Github, and some of them are configured to use Yarn. And in this case, I just use Yarn in order to install dependencies and just do whatever I want. But some others are also using NPM. And in this case, as a user, as a contributor, I cannot just say, no, I want to use Yarn, because the choice of package manager from which a project has been configured has been made by the lead maintainer of the project. So if I use Yarn, I will have some very slightly different behaviors that mean that I will not be able to contribute efficiently to the project. And conversely, if a project is configured to use Yarn, then using NPM will lead to slightly different behaviors, slightly different feature set, and it means that it will be a subpar experience to contribute on the project. So what I mean by that is that the question is not which package manager is the best. That's a question that no one really needs to ask. The real question is, how can we make all package manager coexist in the same ecosystem, because that's what currently happens right now. So a few months ago, I tried to start an experiment called PMM, for Package Manager. And I wanted to show a bit how it works and how I think it could solve a bit this problem. So if that's fine, I will share my screen to make a quick demonstration.
Sure.
Okay, so here I am. Do you see my screen? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I have this install source node dev. So I've built a version of node from the trunk that contains these two that are called PMM. I will quickly show how it's done, but the PR is very small. Basically, the idea is that in this version of node, it ships with a few extra binaries inside the bin folder. So you can see one from for PNPM, PNPX, yarn, and yarn PKG. And the exact same NPM as usual are used. So for now, this only affects yarn and PNPM. And something interesting is that, let's say that I'm so in a temporary folder, and I just want to use npm init. Things will work as you would expect. A new npm project is created. But now, let's say that I want to create a yarn project. Here, when you will run yarn, so if I make a wish yarn, it goes into the yarn that is shipped with node, except that it's not the real yarn. It goes into a wrapper that will see that there is no package manager configured for the current project. And when it detects this, it will ask the user, do you want to use yarn inside this project? Do you want to set it to yarn 1.22.4? And the user can just say yes, and then it will download the 1.22.4 release inside a folder on the user home folder and make it available for use. So for example, here, if I go into the package.json here, I will see that my package manager has been configured to be yarn 1.22.4. Something interesting is that a lot of people have this wrong assumption that they can use a package manager instead of another, and things will probably just work. And that's inexact because, as I mentioned, package manager often have very slightly different behaviors in various places. So using one instead of the other doesn't work. With PMM, what happens is that if we, for example, if I try to run PNPM install, PMM will catch the call and will tell that the current project has been configured to use yarn. And the same would happen if, let's say that I'm creating a new project here. Here, I try to run PNPM, so I can init it. It downloads it on demand, then it runs it. And after that, if I try to use yarn, it's the same thing. It will tell me that this project is configured to use PNPM. So the users cannot just use the wrong package manager by mistake, because yeah, they will be prevented to do so. So that's the very basic idea. And something that's interesting as well is that, for example, let's say that I run PNPM version. So I'm on 5.5.3, but now inside the package.json, let's say that I want to actually use 5.4.11. And now I run PNPM version. And this time PMM will detect that the version is not the same, and it will transparently download and set up PNPM 5.4.11 to be used. And that's also critical because one of the things that we noticed inside Yarn was that one of our best features was this yarn path configuration setting, which allow a user to define the path where the yarn version is located. By doing this, they were able to store the yarn version directly inside their repository so that everyone inside their organization was always ensured that they were using the exact same yarn binary. And that was critical because, for example, let's say that we wanted to make an update. We just needed to update this one file, and people were able to upgrade transparently just by pulling from the trunk. And and this workflow is exactly the same thing with PMM, since the package manager version is stored inside the package.json. So just by updating the package.json, you can be sure that everyone inside your organization will always use the package manager version that you intended to. I made a PMM, so it's a completely open source inside the Arcanist/PMM repository. And I've detailed a bit the exact workflow. There are various ways to build the project, to try it yourself. There is a configuration file so that each package manager is accounted for. Adding a new one means updating this configuration file, which would be embedded within the version of PMM inside each node release. By default, if no package manager is mentioned, for example, let's say that I remove the PNPM field here, I can run all package manager, except that the version that will be used will be the one that will be configured by default inside the manifest. So, yeah. And finally, as for the implementation inside Node itself, it really only takes modifying the tools install.py file in order to add the new shims to yarn, yarn.pkg, PNPM, and PNPX, which can be factored with NPM and NPX. So it's not a large work in terms of technical changes. It's mostly in terms of workflows. I think I've shown most of the tools. So if you have any feedback, questions.
I just want to make sure it's clear. So with regards to NPM, this also installs the NPM client. So instead of shipping the NPM client with the Node distribution, we ship PMM instead. Then NPM is downloaded the first time you use it, yeah?
So the NPM case is really entirely up to you. Ideally, yes, that would be the case. So NPM, Yarn, and PNPM would all be parts of the same wrapper, PMM. But if you prefer to keep distributing NPM by embedding inside your distributions, I mean, that's fine by me. That's really just the only difference between integrating NPM inside PMM or not. So there will be two. The first one is that NPM will not be inside the release, so it might break a few things for your users. So I would understand why you would not want this to happen. But on the other hand, having PMM means that you would be able to block the use of NPM or on PNPM or Yarn projects, or the other way around to prevent the use of Yarn on an NPM project, if that's okay.
How does that part work? Is it that when you call Yarn or NPM, something else runs first
Yes,
to do that
so,
check?
For example, if I do reach on Yarn, it goes into this file, and which is a symlink to lib non-modules PMM dist yarn.js. And if I open this file, it's calling the PMM wrapper with the arguments yarn, which allows it to detect that it needs to download the package manager yarn and run it with the binary yarn. So if we go, for example, in PNPX, it's the same thing, except that it calls the package manager PNPM with the binary PNPX.
Nikita commented in the chat that he has some comments to make. I don't know if he wants to make them here or if he wants to make them in the issue tracker.
Just something. In general, this concern seems valid to me, and I have observed similar things like projects that are bound to specific package managers, and they basically limit the ability to choose a package manager by the user. And moreover, this idea of adding an installer for those package managers seems very good to me, but I have some concerns about the details. One of them is that we probably shouldn't download anything without user confirmation. And the second one is that the format looks a bit strange in the engines because, for example, now someone could specify a yarn version inside the engines field, and with this format, they could specify yarn version in two places in the genes field, like in the PM and in yarn. So I think that probably perhaps this should be a separate package JSON field that leaves acceptable package managers to use with this project, and engines should specify the versions for those package managers.
I'm not sure I follow what you mean by two different fields, but
probably this is just a detail, so perhaps we can take this part of the discussion to GitHub.
yeah, I'm not fixed on Nginx.pm, so if something else is more suitable, I'm entirely fine with it. It was really just same thing. The name of the project PMM is really just temporary placeholder until something else.
Yes, what I meant to say that is someone could also put a yarn version inside engines, and this way it would make that like it will be possible to specify yarn version two ways, one inside engines.pm and one inside engines.yarn.
Oh no, there is no engines.yarn at the moment. There's just engines.pm.
Isn't there?
If you wanted to use pnpm, it would also be engines.pm, except that here it would be pnpm something. It's the same thing for all three package managers.
Okay. And what if someone wants to use yarn or npm?
Sorry?
What if someone specifies that yarn or npm could be used?
No, you cannot do this. Yarn and npm have a lot of differences, especially when you work on them, you start to see that. And for example, just for one simple thing, npm currently doesn't support workspaces. They might eventually support them, but the implementation might be slightly different and the feature set will be also different. So using yarn or npm has never been a supported use case for us. We really recommend that you either completely use yarn or completely use npm, but don't mix them, because otherwise unexpected
Yes,
things might
but
happen.
what if the project developer switch that down to the user?
Sorry?
What if that chose sorry, give me a second. What if it's up to user to choose that in some specific project?
So I'm really only mentioning the case of developers maintenance of a project. So let's say that you're cloning a project from someone and want to contribute on it, then you need to follow the tool that they are using to develop this project. So let's say that they configured their repository to use Yarn, then you should use Yarn. And even if you prefer to use npm, then you should still use Yarn. That's the same reason why you wouldn't replace ESLint by ESInt just because you prefer it. And similarly, if the repository is configured to use npm, then you should use it even if you prefer Yarn. As for users, let's say that you're writing yourself a project and that that you want to use a library that is published on the npm registry. The engines field will not affect that. You will still be able to choose your package manager, and it will be in your top level package.json that you will be able to define the package manager that you want to use. So in this case, the engines would only apply to the top level package.json.
Okay, so it will ignore all of what's in the lower level package.jsons?
For example, all your transitive dependencies, engines.pm field would be ignored, yes.
But so it'll use whatever the top level one is?
Yes.
How does that work? I guess it's up to the project to make sure it works, because like, you know, the argument that you have to use the one that the project's chosen, what if the module chooses, or the package, like one of the dependent packages has chosen something else?
So when you publish a package on the NPM registry, you should make sure that it will work on all package managers regardless of the one that the consumers will use. In general, it's pretty easy. The main difference in package managers are mostly when you're developing with them. For example, Workspace are a client-only feature in that you only use them from within your repository. You never publish workspaces to the users. So it's possible to publish a package that is completely portable across package managers. It's developing that is more difficult.
I just checked, and engines.yarn works and is used. Like you can specify a yarn version range using engines.yarn, and invalid range will be blocked.
You mean in the engine check in Yarn itself right now?
Yes, you can specify in engines, just engines.yarn.
Again, I'm really open to change it to a different field.
So maybe that one we should take back to the issue tracker. I see Mary has her hand up as well.
Yes, I have two questions. First one, when you execute Yarn for the first time, for example, it will ask you if you want to install. Is it possible to non-interactively install Yarn? For example, if you are building a Docker image, you will not be able to answer yes.
So the offline case is also something that should be possible. It's not yet implemented, but the way I would see that happen is that you would have a command that would download a specific version of a package manager under a tarball version that you would store anywhere you want. And then you would have another command that would install the package manager that is stored inside a tarball. So the idea is that from before building your Docker image, you would store this version when you still have the network. And then inside the Docker image, once you don't have network anymore, you would just hydrate the package manager cache by unpacking this archive.
Okay. Next question. Is it possible to download the package managers from a private registry?
At the moment, the configuration is here. So there are different strategies to download them since, for example, NPM, PNPM are on the NPM registry, but Yarn 2 is distributed through Github. So I'm not sure that using a private registry would be easy because then you have a configuration to configure, like tokens, things like this. But that's something that we can discuss.
Yeah, because in some companies it will be not possible to download from the registry because the build step happens blocking the calls.
Mm-hmm.
So even downloading from GitHub, some companies will have a copy of Yarn instead, similar to a private registry, to ensure that what is being downloaded is correct and there is no man-in-the-middle attack or anything like that.
I was thinking, it's an excellent point there, Mary. I was thinking that for that particular case, having it where PMM can't, you can instruct it basically to download these to a local cache separately, or have it point to a local cache of where these things are at, rather than using this configuration. That could be a configuration on PMM itself that the user has to do locally, right? So their command line option or whatever for PMM. Yeah. But I definitely think that there's ways around that, but it definitely needs to be covered.
just for example, that could be something like yarn at 1 that would be stored inside yarn.tgz. Then later you would download it from my private registry yarn tgz, and then create yarn.tgz. So this kind of workflow would be generic enough to work in a lot of cases. The user would have the responsibility of calling curl in order to install the package manager version that they would want to use. I think as long as we can work with installing a package manager from an archive, then there's a lot of possibilities that are open.
I agree. Can we skip the store step? Use just curl and hydrate instead?
Sure, the PIM store is just to download it in a standardized way so that you don't have to care about how to generate the archive. But if you prefer to bundle them yourself and also the TGZ wherever you want, the hydrate function would work just fine.
Okay.
So what's the difference? Like, I'm just trying to understand if somebody wanted to use PMM today, could they just do, npm install PMM and then it would work exactly the way you've shown? Or is there some aspect to this that only comes if it's integrated with Node itself?
So one big aspect is that it will just work for everyone that uses Node. So as I mentioned, the big problem that I've met in the ecosystem was people that would not use Yarn because NPM is by default. So it might seem a bit trivial, but the reality is that they are locking themselves out of an option just because it's more complicated for them to integrate Yarn within their infrastructure. And I think that's something that we should be able to help, because if it's more difficult for them to install Yarn, it means also that it's more difficult for them to contribute to projects that use Yarn. And that's a problem because we want to make it easier for everyone to contribute to all the projects in the JavaScript ecosystem.
I guess I'm just trying to understand how much more difficult is it more than an npm install, or is it?
No,
like,
it should be on par with the npm install, but there's already a fair amount of people that find it strange that they have to use npm install in order to install Yarn. Personally, I don't have a problem with that. That's even the thing that I've put inside the documentation, to just use this command. But every now and then we see folks on Twitter mentioning, hey, well, it's weird. So it turns out that it's actually a blocker for some people. Another thing is that it would also make it easier to support specifying the exact package manager that you want to use, which is a good feature that we want folks to use, because in our opinion, there is no Yarn introduced the concept of log file, and it became widespread. But ironically, there is the very first dependency of a project that is not very logged yet. It's the package manager itself. The package manager is not part of the log file. And by having an engines.pm file or any other field, it would allow us to log the package manager and finally have an environment that would be completely self-contained, almost self-contained.
Are there any other questions?
No, I left comments in the chat, and I will move that to GitHub.
I will look at them. I will open an issue on the GitHub repository.
Here, I'm just going to take those two and paste them into the minutes that we take here.
So, going back, one of the reasons I definitely want to put this on the agenda is that the idea is that this would be added to the Node distribution. And there are the two approaches we could take, where we continue ship the NPM client and PMM. Or the alternative is we ship PMM and allow the NPM client to be installed through PMM. So obviously the latter changes kind of the default out of the box behavior for Node users. So it's got to be something that's carefully considered. But the way that this has been done, if they, the first time somebody does an NPM install, it's going to go off and grab and download that, with the caveat of, they may need to approve the download. So it does change some of that user experience, but personally, I think it changes it for the better. But that is a decision that we need to, we need to come to.
Okay, I think we should move on to the next issues. I guess you can talk about next steps in the issue itself, unless there's anything else you wanted to bring up today.
Thank you, Mel.
Thanks.
Yep, thanks for coming. Okay, so let's move on to the other issues which are tagged for the agenda. The next one is simpler and faster readable async iterator. I know we've discussed this one in the past. I had thought that, is this something new? I guess this one is, we had discussed it. This is the actual PR that was put together, and who was it who added it to the agenda? So I guess Matteo added it to the agenda. I think maybe as an FYI. I don't know if anybody else has any more context. If not, I guess as a, as a backport of that December major labeled PR, if people can go take a look, that would be great. Otherwise, unless there's anything else people want to discuss, we can move on to the next issue, which is rename default branch from master domain or something similar. Number 33834, that one really is there as a reminder that, we want to do that. We were waiting on some additional tooling from GitHub. I know Miles had mentioned that we were experimenting with some of our repos and have some moved some over. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything else on that one.
GitHub added a new feature to choose the default branch for new repositories. And I think we should change it. I don't know if anyone did it yet.
Is there any downside or?
Not really.
No, okay.
Since it's only for new repositories, it doesn't affect anything.
I think that makes sense to me. Probably we just want an issue in the admin repo saying, hey, we're going to do this, right?
Yeah, there is an issue, and I think we have quorum for that. We have 5 folks from TSC and ComCom already. So someone just needs to go ahead and do it.
Okay. Just going to find that to put in the minutes.
I can just change it.
Okay.
Ruben just said he could just change it. So I mean, unless there's objections to that, I'd say, yeah. And then once it's, what I'd probably do though is post an issue, just give folks a heads up, like I'm going to be changing this like over the next 30 minutes or so. And
well, it's only going to be about new repositories in case a new repository is created inside of the Node.js organization.
Right, we're not changing the existing one. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think like it's unlikely there'll be one of those in flight as it gets changed. So.
No.
Yeah.
So basically, Ruben, you were volunteering to do it?
Yeah,
Okay.
done.
Okay, well then let's, that's anything else on that one that people want to mention before we move on? We're slowly, doing things like turning that on and trying out switching some of the existing repos. Anything else people want to mention? Okay, if not, let's move on. I would propose we move to the BLM convert to button 3306 and then loop back to the discussion of the unhandled rejections. Does that sound good to people?
Yeah.
And we probably should time box both of these because we want to keep at least 10 minutes for a private section at the end. So the Black Lives Matter convert to button 3306 is whoever added that to the agenda here.
It was Miles.
Okay. We don't have Miles today. Does anybody have any context on the discussion that he was looking for?
It's basically a style change on the Black Lives Matter banner on the website that removes the gray stripe behind the Black Lives Matter banner, turning it into a button. On the pull request, there are screenshots of both options. So I guess it was added to the TSC agenda just to decide if it should be changed or not.
Are there objections in the issue or?
Yes, Miles mentioned he liked the current approach better, and that was the extent of the discussion, basically.
Okay.
So maybe folks can go to the pull request, look at the options, and comment on what they prefer. It's probably better than discussing it on the meeting.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can take a look and comment in the issue. Okay, that makes sense. And I guess, it's, we can go from there. Okay, so then the other issue, which is audit Google account access. I know Rich had pinged the issue. Brian said that he would take a look at that soon, but I don't think it's done yet, so we should just leave that on. And then let's loop back to the change default -- unhandled rejections. Do you want to take that one, Mary?
Yes. So the survey ended on Monday. We got the results. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
We got 2,400 and something responses. I'm not sure if everyone had time to read through the responses. There's a lot here, so it's probably not a good idea to go through all the questions, but for example, a lot of folks using promises are using for production code, for tasks and examples. The majority of responders were developing web servers, followed by command line tools and third-party libraries. And the overall preference was to either choose the strict mode or throw as the default, with about 20% on warn and warn with error code, and 2% on the non-behavior, and 33 responses on other, which we don't have the responses yet. I'm still waiting on the foundation to send the raw data here. But yeah, that's the overall results. If folks want to dig deeper, I posted the link on chat. And now we have to make a decision.
Right. I think I think some of those, the raw data might be interesting before.
I agree, especially if we can correlate the responses. For example, correlate the default that users chose with the use case that they are working mostly on.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you should postpone for the next meeting.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have enough people here, and even if we did, something like this, I think the vote should be handled through an issue where everybody has a chance to chime in.
Agree. So according to the charter, we have to call for a vote on the meeting. So I'm explicitly calling for a vote. Does anyone object?
No objection.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess you'll open an issue to, basically say this is the issue for the vote. Possibly you can add in a little bit about like a suggestion on the timeline, given that, we might want to get the raw data or whatever to fill into that.
Right. And we also want to get these changed before V15. So yeah, I'm going to work with the foundation to see when we can get the raw data. And then we can schedule the voting. Should the voting be public, or how do we handle votes usually?
I think it's normally through the consensus, right? Like if we basically go through and in an issue, unless somebody has a reason to say this one should not be in a public issue. I think that would be my first take.
Okay, that's something we can discuss on the issue as well.
Yeah, true. We could say, are people comfortable or uncomfortable? But I think by default, most of our votes or, making sure we have consensus is through an issue in the repo.
Okay. I think that's it for this issue then.
Okay, that sounds good. So that gets us through all of our issues that were tagged. I think this time we should skip strategic initiative updates. I didn't see too many in the issue, and we want to keep some time for the private section. So at this point, unless anybody has something that you think we should cover before we close out the public session, we'll go ahead and do that. That's okay. I'm going to stop